Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Today we're welcoming back to the podcast John Ganz, author of the recently released book, When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s. Yeah, we're talking about famous figures, 90s legends like John Gotti, Pat Buchanan, Ross Perot, Murray Rothbard, all our friends. We know them all and we love them all.
No, it's good. It's just like a 3-year period that's covered really in depth with lots of great storytelling and anecdotes. And as you might imagine, a lot of through lines to politics today and a lot of prefiguring of Trump and MAGA. But it's just a fascinating study in its own right as well. Yeah. So lots of good stuff that we discussed.
Yeah. And we also mentioned briefly the French elections, which were a surprising victory for the left popular front. So, you know, we'll take
we'll take the good news, man.
Absolutely.
Even if it's French.
Yeah. Suddenly I'm back to my Humphrey Bogart, Casablanca, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. No more freedom fries. They're French fries once again.
Yeah. Or maybe they're freedom fries, but that's good because we respect France. Or Belgium. But yeah, before we get to that, a couple of housekeeping notes. As usual, that this podcast is sponsored by the American Prospect magazine. And so if you subscribe at $10 a month, you can get a free digital subscription to the magazine, plus a discounted print subscription if you so wish, plus our bonus episodes. At $5 a month, just the bonus episodes. Or you can just enjoy the free stuff. However you want. It's up to you. This is a consumer marketplace. You got to vote with your dollars. It's the only way you can make a meaningful impact on anything. And so we.
But as if you're good socialists, you know, we do appreciate those iTunes reviews. It warms our heart, and I think it does expose the show to people that don't already know about it. So that's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, more important than ever, given that the social media as a method of distribution is almost totally collapsed. Right.
It's true.
Yeah. Feel great about all the hundreds of hours I sank into Twitter. Really wonderful time spent. But anyway, let's stop complaining. Get to our interview with John Ganz right now. Yeah, John Ganz, welcome to the podcast. And hearty congratulations on the manifest success of your book, which is called When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s. Certified New York Times bestseller. So... you know, we got us a heavy hitter on the podcast here.
Well, thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me back. And thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I was on the very bottom of the list for 1 week, but they can never take away from me. I'm forever a New York Times bestseller. And I'm going to demand that people introduce me as such. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we get to the book, I thought, you know, it would be interesting to discuss briefly the French elections.
Sure.
You recently wrote a post on this. You know, we mentioned it actually in the last episode, but you know, to refresh, basically there was a first round of elections. It's a sort of a two-step process in which the far right party, National Rally, came in first, and that scared the bejesus out of everyone. Pretty much, it seems. And there was a quick effort to assemble a popular front across, you know, so the left parties in France had already assembled, you know, a bunch of squabbling, you know, lefties. We're all familiar with that type of behavior, but they sort of came together. And then after the far right came first, there was an effort among the Macronists, the centrists, to basically join up with that effort. And it was a success. In fact, the left popular front came in first. So, thoughts on, you know, how that situation developed and what it sort of, means.
Well, it's a big shock for everybody. I think everyone was assuming that the national, it's no longer the National Front, it's Rassemblement National, the successor party to the Front National, the far right party led by Marine Le Pen, would come in first, and possibly. Some people were raising the possibility that they would get an absolute majority, but you know, the Popular Front, the Nouveau Popular Front, came in first, which was a real surprise to everybody, and maybe even more surprise, Macron's sort of unpopular bloc comes in second and relegates the Front National, who looked like it was about to have its first big resounding victory in French history to third place. And this was just, because of the success of tactical voting, which was that, in areas where there were runoffs, candidates dropped out and endorsed the anti-RN candidate, and voters held their noses and voted for parties that they probably found ideologically unpalatable. So you would have neoliberals voting for communists and vice versa in certain areas. And this, formed a broad defense against the threat of the RN, and dealt them a really humiliating defeat, which I think that they're going to have trouble coming back from. Honestly, the story with I'm just going to call them their old name, the National Front. The story has been they've been slowly encroaching, and the old kind of strategy or tradition, if you want to call it, of Republican defense or the Republican bloc, where parties with different ideologies would unify, usually in the second round, to defeat Le Pen's party, seemed to be fading for a few reasons. Leaders weren't so committed to it anymore. There was a lot of abstentionism and immobilization in the electorate, and the memory of Vichy and the war and the occupation and their connection to Le Pen's party were fading. So a lot of commentators said that the Republican bloc, the Republican front, was over as a political strategy and as a tradition. And that's not true, apparently. It's a huge victory. And then a lot of people on the left said, well, that's a losing ticket. If we keep on following that, we'll keep on being second fiddle to the center right or liberals or centrist liberals that keep on using that as a tactic to scare us. But it showed that in a united front or popular front scenario, the left could come out first, which to me is sort of what I've always wanted to believe and said was possible. And I don't know how France is going to be governed now. That's very hard. The differences between even the moderate parties, quote unquote, on the left and Macron's ideas about where France could go are quite stark. So forming a government, coalition, or whatever, cohabitation, whatever situation they figure out is going to be hard. But I would say in the short term, I think especially you guys and the listenership of this podcast, should feel ecstatic.
Yeah, and it wasn't a sure thing after the first round, because the left seemingly was quick to say that their third place candidate would drop out to support the Macronist. But even Macron himself and some of the centrists didn't seem as quick to jump in on that, at least from what I was reading along the way. It seemed like that was the question mark.
Yeah, Macron did not do his Republican duty, and he was a little bit slow getting there. But his Prime Minister Attal really, I think, a great moment of patriotism. Said, look, it's our moral duty to ensure that the Front National does not enter to government, and I think that was a huge difference. So I think, and also, look, differences vary on their attitude to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, but he wasn't the brains behind the National Front. It was other leftists, other members of his party, and other left-wing parties who brought this together. Well, I don't think he's going to be sidelined, but the big voices who called all the shots seem to be calling all the shots in French politics. Mélenchon, Macron, who, to my mind, as an outside observer, both seem very arrogant and imperious, weren't really the motive force in this. It was other figures, and also ultimately the French electorate at the end of the day. So, perhaps some really hopeful developments in French politics, and we'll see where it goes. It could continue to be a mess. It could be impossible to govern. Who knows? But right now, this was the best possible outcome I can imagine.
To clarify, Mélenchon he ran for president against Macron several years ago. He's a sort of longtime gadfly, right? Sort of Jeremy Corbyn-esque dude. and is after losing has sort of been relegated a little bit to the sidelines in the left movement, but is still quite prominent. Has his own party.
Well, he did very well last time. Surprisingly well. He came not that short of where Le Pen was. So it sort of cemented him as the major singular voice on the left, which a lot of people on the French left are not so happy about. But his position is a little bit more complicated now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, best of luck to France.
And hey, this is right on the heels of the Brits kicking out the Tories after 14 years of rule. So that's not a bad 1-2 combo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book. I have read it, or actually I should clarify, I've sort of been bouncing back and forth between the galley you sent and the audio book, which I thought was very well done. You got a professional to do it, unlike, mine. I did it myself, and so it doesn't sound quite as good as yours.
No, you've got a great voice for radio. I didn't do it because I just didn't think I would. Yeah, I wanted to leave it to a professional, and I think.
But also, from what Ryan tells me, it was a painstaking process, which
that's also what I kind of gather, that it kind of was not that much fun.
Yeah, I got some money from it, but that is hard work. You see why those people, they get paid, because that is difficult to sit there and read out loud, and perform. Actually, I guess it's kind of like acting in a sense. And you can tell, a really good reader can make all the difference. And to return to my point, the audiobook is very good. So if you're an audiobook listener, definitely feel free to check that one out. It is on Audible and elsewhere. But my first question, so I think people who are, familiar with your writing and so forth may be somewhat confused as to why you picked the 1990s. The popular conception of the 1990s, insofar as people were even born yet. It's sort of a happy period. Bill Clinton playing the saxophone. We didn't have a lot of big time wars. It's sort of small stuff in Sarajevo and stuff, but more or less in America, it was happy times. The economy seemed to be doing pretty good. Had a lot of jobs. Growth was strong. Tech boom, et cetera, et cetera. So why pick the 1990s? What fascinates you about that period?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I kind of got into it because, around the time of Charlottesville and before that, shortly after Trump was elected, there was a lot of interest in what was being called the alt-right then, right? There was a lot of interviews with these guys who were becoming prominent and viewed Trump as kind of a breakthrough for their views. And this guy, Murray Rothbard, this libertarian economist, kept coming up as an inspiration for all of these guys. To a man, these guys who became neo-Nazis all said that they read Murray Rothbard as the kind of beginning of their awakening. So I was reading him, and I found an article of his from his newsletter in 1992 called Right-Wing Populism. And it was sort of this reflection on David Duke winning in 1991, not winning, I'm sorry, David Duke's gubernatorial race in 1991. He did win the Republican nomination for governor in Louisiana. And basically what Rothbard is saying is that this right-wing populist strategy that he associates with David Duke, who of course had been a grand wizard of the KKK and a neo-Nazi, was really a path forward for the right, or the type of right that he wanted to see. He became an advisor. He was a close confidant and advisor to the Pat Buchanan campaign. And his right-wing populist strategy was, one of the influences there. So that was the first thing. And around that time, there was an essay in the New York Times Magazine by Rick Perlstein, who at the time I didn't know, but he's become sort of a mentor to me. And it kind of called for a reevaluation of the history of the American right. That perhaps cranks and oddballs that, that the official story said were marginalized were more important. So I thought I kind of had one of those threads, and I just kept pulling on it. And then I got from Rothbard to this whole paleo-conservative movement and Buchanan's, right-wing nationalist populist primarying of Bush, which anticipated Trump in many ways. Then, the whole year sort of unfolded. The recession that was going on, you see the beginnings of the fruits of neoliberalism, the bitter fruits of neoliberalism coming to bear to fruition. Excuse the repetition. And the response to that not being a left-wing rejection of it, but it's kind of an ugly new kind of right-wing populist politics. So that the whole world of that early period of the 1990s sort of started to unfold to me, and I thought it was very interesting. And there are a lot of eerie parallels with what was going on in the Trump era and in our era now. So that's kind of what got me interested in it, and I decided to see if I could write a book about that whole period, which covers roughly. I mean, the center of the book is in 1992 because that's the election. But the book, I would say, encompasses events that go from 1989 to 1993.
I was surprised, like I was born in 1986, right? So my first sort of political memories of any kind were the 90s election. Probably 1996 was when I sort of understood that there was like a presidential election and talked to my parents about it. But I thought I had a better memory of the time that I did. And, you mentioned like Pat Buchanan's primary campaign against George H.W. Bush. And then also, you go into detail about Ross Perot, who was, in my vague memory, he was a sort of a punchline. It's like this weirdo, rich guy who was running for president because of trade something, and he was just like this joke on Saturday Night Live, and everybody thought he was really funny. But the combination of those two things, as you say, Pat Buchanan and Ross Perot running this sort of like quasi-demagogic presidential campaign that did shockingly well. Like, I think, was it the very best third-party result in American history, or in there somewhere?
Definitely since the Bull Moose Party, it gets very close to 20%. Yeah,
and so can you talk a little bit about, what those two campaigns sort of revealed, about like kind of, as you said, it's impossible not to draw the comparison between, like this marriage of the paleo conservative sort of like going back to the, pre World War II version of conservatism and this a populist billionaire outsider, quote unquote, running, is like going to turn the table of politics over. Like, what's that about?
Yeah, again, that was one of the parallels that was really striking to me. I think, with Ross Perot, what emerges is in this era is a lot of anger and dissatisfaction with the political establishment for partly economic reasons, for the sense that the political establishment is in bed with, basically hucksters like the savings and loan industry, that they're entirely self-serving, that Washington can't get anything done. So there's a kind of populist rejection of the establishment, and a lot of figures come along to take advantage of that, and Ross Perot was one of them. And Ross Perot, it's a little ironic for him to set himself up as an outsider, because this man made his fortune on government money, on welfare money, really, because as his company helped to administer the big Great Society programs, Medicare and Medicaid. So, but he portrayed himself as an alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans that was either not kind of neither left nor right, but was obviously right, combined features of both left-wing and right-wing critiques of the American political establishment. Critiques maybe is too intellectual word. Gripes. And he got an enormous popular movement behind him. And at certain points during the campaign, with a kind of very vague program, not a lot of specifics of what it was actually do. A lot of bluster. And at one point in the campaign, in around June, we're not long after where we are now, it looked like he might win. He was in front of both candidates. He was a phenomenon. He was crushing it. The press was beginning to uncover sort of unattractive things about him, and people were starting to respond to them. But both sides didn't know what to do with the Perot people. And, both parties did their best to try to channel the vein of dissatisfaction that he exposed. In certain ways in the future, it falls a little bit outside of the time of this book. I think the Republicans kind of co-opted it better, probably because it was more their natural territory. But yeah, Ross Perot's paranoia also has suggestions of Trump to me. I think Ross Perot, although, as my book makes clear, what he was actually up to in his business enterprise was iffy, probably has more right to claim as a legitimate businessman than Trump, who sort of since the 90s has just been selling his name and not much else. But yeah, I found in the kind of cult that Perot was able to build up around him, I couldn't help but see the parallels there.
No, I was going to say another interesting connection to the present that I hadn't thought about is the new nationalism you talk about with Buchanan and others. Their move in kind of rejecting the bourgeois neoconservatism is to, as you write, dwell not so much on the size of government, but on who controls it. And this is in tandem with something I also wasn't aware of, which is the kind of dissatisfaction with Reagan and the legacy of Reagan, which, I thought a through line would be kind of making Saint Reagan into one of their, people they would always worship. But the internecine battles, right, show something different.
Reagan was never the first choice of the hard right. The new right, which we associate so much with Ronald Reagan's victory, really wanted either John Connally or Phil Crane. Reagan, they viewed as kind of a squish, which is strange because from our perspective, Reagan is a real hardcore ideologue. Of course, there's always people who are more hardcore. And at the end of Reagan's administration, many people were disappointed with where the country ended up. They viewed him as a moderate who had to accommodate, with liberals, Democrats. So within the conservative movement, there was a current of dissatisfaction with Reagan. I wouldn't say Buchanan always worshipped Reagan, but he thought that as he worshipped Nixon, who was also not that popular with the conservative movement, but he thought that there was a great deal of political territory to the right of Ronald Reagan, and he wanted to occupy that. But there were people in his circle, certainly, that rejected Reagan outright for a lot of different reasons, for what his perceived moderation, for his stances on free trade, for his stances on democracy, interestingly enough. And they thought Reagan represented something a little than what some Reaganites might think. So I would say that was a current that starts to make itself felt. The other thing to remember about Reagan and the conservative movement is that Reagan is an exception in terms of maybe not of his ideology, but in terms of his affect. Reagan is very sunny and optimistic. He kind of synthesizes a lot of things about FDR with the conservative movement. The conservative movement is dour, pessimistic, fatalistic, has a negative view of human nature. So I think there was a big difference in affect between Reagan and a lot of the kind of not only the grassroots, but the kind of movement intellectuals, organic intellectuals of the conservative movement. And then they kind of returned to an angrier voice and Buchanan, who may have been a kind of more natural spokesman for them. So Reagan was a sort of exception in strange ways. And that speaks to his ability to win. That he wasn't, he was a conservative ideologue in many ways, but he was able to adapt himself. This was true as his governorship in California. It was true as president. He was able to adapt himself like a smart politician, a successful politician, to certain political realities that people to his right believed should be bowled over, not accepted.
He had a sense of humor as well, which, Perot had a sense of humor, whether you like his sense of humor or not. And say what you will about Trump, right? He's not sunny, right? But he does know how to crack a joke.
He's funny. He's sarcastic. He's sarcastic for sure. Sarcasm is a big part of this. Buchanan's not funny, but he has a certain bitter sarcasm.
Right.
Perot has a folksy sense of humor. Had a certain even though he was very egotistical, could even have a certain sense of humor about himself. Perot looks very harmless and folksy compared to what came after. Although, if you look under the surface, you see some kind of disturbing authoritarian tendencies too. But I think Perot's folksiness, again, a lot of this stuff is affect, you know? His folksiness and his appeal to people were a big part of it. He seemed, with his kind of Texas accent, I think Trump's New York accent is a big part of his appeal. With his Texas accent, he seemed no nonsense and competent and smart, but not pretentious, down to earth. And I think that was a huge part of his appeal, besides anything he said specifically or any of his positions, which are always very vague and sometimes contradictory. So yeah, and again, Reagan was folksy, would be folksy. It was very trained he's a trained actor. He could turn it on, but he was stage managed too. I think that Perot, Buchanan maybe a little bit, and Duke to a certain extent, like Trump, had a more organic relationship with the crowd, where the feedback of the crowd was part of their politics, building on the crowd's energy. This ambiguous situation where it wasn't sure who was leading who, I think, was a part of that.
Yeah. Your classic sort of charismatic relationship with the crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
You see that with Trump's. I mean, sometimes like very explicitly, like I can remember him on occasion attempting to get his crowds to go get the Trump vaccine, that he funded through Operation
Sometimes they didn't like it.
No,
That's the only time I've ever seen the crowd turn on him, ever.
And now he's not talking about that anymore. And in fact, he wants to ban all vaccination requirements for school attendance in the country.
Right.
Yeah. We're bringing back polio. We're bringing it back very strongly. On the question, someone I wanted to not let slip, you mentioned sort of organic intellectuals of the right. There, one sort of smaller character in the book is Sam Francis. This really quite repellent guy, who, a writer and sort of gadfly in the conservative movement. But can you talk a little bit about him and his sort of place in all this?
Sure. I mean, he's sort of the chorus of the book in a way. Sam Francis was a member of the conservative movement. He worked for the Heritage Foundation. He worked as a staffer for a Republican senator from North Carolina. He was editor and op-ed writer at the Washington Times. And basically, he had a very radical conception of what the Reagan Revolution meant. He took it literally as a revolution. He thought it was the expression of what he called Middle American radicals, this sociological group that was devised in the 1970s by a sociologist called Don Warren, which were people of the lower middle class and working class, white, who rejected both domination of the political establishment and big business to a certain extent, and also resented minority groups, the poor, who seemed to be getting government handouts. And these have been talked about many times as Reagan Democrats, Nixon silent majority. This demographic, this spirit, this attunement is well known in American politics. But he saw this as a potential basis for a very radical reconception of the country. He thought that since the New Deal, basically the country had been under the managerial regime of liberal elites, and he viewed his middle American radicals as a revolutionary subject that would overthrow that and replace it with a new national populist regime, sometimes in a very literal way. He seemed to have not much care or concern, unlike other conservatives, for traditions of American governance. He views them as kind of sentimental attachments to the old ways. He kind of wants a strong executive come along, like Rothbard with his right-wing populism, and sort of smash up the state in the favor of this group and govern in this favor of this group. And what's so striking about what he says is he sort of is, conservatives always look to the past. I mean, and I think it's better to call him a man of the right or a man of the radical right, maybe even a fascist, as he once half-jokingly called himself, than a conservative. He looked to the past for certain inspirations, but he looked to the future. He thought that this future regime was the first that would truly be able to call itself American, that the other forms of American nationalism and republicanism, weren't the type of extreme nationalistic state and society that he envisioned. So there was something futuristic he had in mind. So he's a very strange figure, but his analysis of the state of the American electorate, their anger, what they were looking for, I think in some ways, although I highly disagree with it, and I think in some ways it was wrong-headed, seems prescient at other times.
Yeah, he was correctly identifying some of the problems. It seems fair to say, even if the solutions were grotesque and unlikely to actually, bring back the, manufacturing jobs or whatever.
Yes.
One final character, at least for my part, that I wanted to bring up, someone that I again sort of vaguely knew about a little bit, but didn't remember any of this stuff, was John Gotti. The mobster, the literal mob boss, who somehow became a sort of populist hero for, a significant fraction of the American population. And so can you speak about how that came to pass and what it sort of revealed about the broader, political, background that he could come to be seen as such?
Yeah, he almost became a political figure in New York. People were joking about him becoming mayor, and maybe it wasn't so much of a joke. He became a folk hero. New York was undergoing an economic downturn, a really deep crisis. The city seemed like it was out of control. And Gotti became this almost Robin Hood folk hero. Not that he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. He stole from everybody and took for himself. But he became an object of fascination and a kind of standing up to, again, there's really no better word for it than the establishment. A rejection of liberalism in the broadest sense of the term. An idea that, he stood for an older tradition, an old way of doing things. That was better. People remembered mob-run neighborhoods as being safe. People had a lot more tolerance for the type of crime that Gotti did, and thought it was less harmful than, say, what they saw black criminals doing. Never mind who was distributing the drugs. Gotti's crew were big heroin distributors. They didn't follow the rarely followed Gambino rule against drug dealing, which basically no one's followed ever. It's usually just a pretext to whack somebody. So yeah, it was remarkable. And, he was a murderer and a thug and kind of in the eyes of many of the feds who were after him, a kind of low class one. But, people went gaga over him. And again, I thought that the transformation of this tabloid figure, who was essentially kind of a mobster and a criminal, he was a mobster, into a figure of public fascination and someone who even seemed to be earning public support, was just another ingredient in the whole, and of course the media and celebrity fascination with him, was just another whole ingredient to kind of this melange that eventually added up to Trumpism.
Yeah. And of course, Trump would love to be Gotti. That would be somebody who would love to be, right?
Yeah, I think he identifies he comes out of the same world. They shared a lawyer at one time. Roy Cohn who was Gambino House counsel, helped get Donald Trump off. Helped get Gotti off of his first murder charge. And, Roy Cohn helped, Trump get the concrete for Trump Plaza by working out a deal with Fat Tony Salerno, head of the Genovese family, and Paul Castellano, who Gotti eventually whacked. Excuse me, whacked, and to work out a concrete deal. So yeah, there is a literal and figurative proximity of Trump to these mafia figures, and I think he admires them a great deal, and he's been playing up his comparison to them. He's talking about himself being Al Capone recently and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of comparisons with that.
And this links back to the book about Murray Rothbard, because you talk about his views on The Godfather and Goodfellas.
Yes.
So if you wouldn't mind, because that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both Sam Francis and Murray Rothbard, from slightly different angles, were big fans of The Godfather, the movie and the novel. Rothbard hated Goodfellas. He thought that it destroyed the romance of the mob movies, and was sort of almost a liberal conspiracy to get rid of the romance of the mob movie. He thought that The Godfather reflected basically what anarcho-capitalism would be like. A self-regulating group of which is really funny because these guys are just thugs trying to kill each other. And he ignores the tragic collapse of the family in The Godfather. But yeah, he was like, oh, the Goodfellas is supposed to be realistic, but that's not I prefer the Godfather's kind of idealized and romantic.
So much for family values. Come on. I mean,
right. Yeah. These are the kind of family values that perhaps they're talking about.
Fratricide. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly. He completely ignores that. In the total annihilation of the family that Michael basically does. And then you've got Sam Francis's take on The Godfather, which is that The Godfather is kind of a critique of liberal modernity. And it shows that violence, particularism, ethnic and family particularism, and fraud are the nature of politics and the system. And the liberal conceit that, you can join a market society, a democratic capitalist society, as a meritocracy, or however you want else to conceive it, was sort of a lie and a myth. And The Godfather was a corrective, a realistic corrective to it, but also had a tragic dimension because it showed that even that was unstable, and would collapse. It wasn't like The Godfather's vision of power showed, a lasting regime, but just that it was what was necessary, violence. And he compares what he calls the depiction of Gemeinschaft, community, in The Godfather as the family, to Gesellschaft, society, the modern bureaucracy, modern state, capitalism, so on and so forth. And he says, well, the Godfather makes that look favorable in comparison. So he even though he recognized the instability, but that was he says that it's a slap in the face of the modernist myth that we can live under democratic capitalism. And again, here you get a kind of conservatism that's very different from the conservatism of the Reaganites, who basically thought that the market and capitalism provided a framework, where people could find a niche. But the conception of the market that these guys had, or what of capitalism that these guys had, was a little bit different. Domination, direct domination was built into it. Violence was a part of it. Coercion and crime were sort of intrinsic to it, which, is not far from what we Marxists say about it, right? Is that the law, Marx says the law of the jungle, it still exists in the rule of the market. But what they said is, look, the law of the jungle exists. That's that. There's no stage beyond it. You accept the law of the jungle, and you get a big club, and you get behind the biggest guy you can and whack everybody else on the head. There's no transcendence to a better stage. It can't be tamed in the social democratic way, and it can't be overcome in the sort of communist way, where there's another stage of social development. No, that's society.
It's more Hobbesian than
yeah. And that's very much Trump's worldview. It's just like you get it. It's his international worldview too. He does not believe in non-zero sum relationships. There is an exploit, which is funny because at the same time he has this sort of chummy, stick with me, blah blah. But he believes like either other countries are exploiting us or we're exploiting them. I mean, say what you will about free trade. he has a very crude, almost mercantilist idea of relationships between nations. It's just like they're taking advantage of us or we're taking advantage of them. There's no like, oh, we'll work out. And that's his whole ethos in business too. It's just like, there's no good deal unless you're screwing somebody, right?
I remember reading about this at Liquidated, about the ethnography of Wall Street, talking, I don't know if it was some hedge fund manager who was talking about, it's not a win just if you beat the other guy. You need the other guy to lose. It can't be a win-win.
Right.
And that's not actually a win. This mentality, right?
And definitely Trump has that vision of things for sure.
It strikes me on the mob movie context that there's sort of a parallel between The Godfather and Goodfellas and like the theoretical version of the, sort of criminal populist guy who ignores all the liberal bromides and conquers the establishment, and then like the Trump presidency,
exactly.
The Godfather as this like Shakespearean drama with these complex characters and this like a great romantic story about honor and duty and like how it all goes wrong. And then Goodfellas being like the actual reality of these seamy shithead morons who like addicted to drugs and end up in just horrible, motel rooms and disgraced and impoverished. And that's the Trump presidency, government by imbeciles who fuck everything up. And it's just like none of the, great romantic, ending the American carnage or whatever that Trump promises.
Yeah, they're goons. They're goons. I think that's exactly right. That's basically how I sort of end the book is that Goodfellas is real life. It's based on reality. I mean, I love the Godfather is. I watched it recently. It's a fantastic movie. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
And I go back and forth, which these are not to type myself as the most basic American male, but these are two of my favorite movies, really. So and there's nothing wrong with those films. They're both terrific movies in different ways. But I would say, speaking as a realist, I appreciate the beauty and the romance of The Godfather, but Goodfellas is reality. That's what it's like. It's these fuckheads, losers, who can't get their shit together and ultimately undermine themselves because they killed too many people and they're out of control. I think that's right. I've been in the dialectic of the Goodfellas and the Godfather, and also it's just like it shows, even Godfather shows Goodfellasization going on because the family is falling apart from sheer greed and violence,
Yeah.
Some of that is obviously to do with these kind of like complicated, tragic stories like Fredo's humiliation or Michael's fear of losing the family. There's all these complicated, tragic downfalls, but ultimately they end up in the same place, which is dead or in jail. Also, we don't. I don't want to bring it up, but I think a final interesting look at that is also in The Irishman, which I think is an additional. There's a coda in a way on what was being said in Goodfellas. So yeah. I'm a Scorsese guy. What can I say? I love The Godfather. I'll watch it again and again. It's maybe a more beautiful movie, but not as funny. That's for sure.
Yeah. There are any attractive young women who want to hear about great movies, just call up John and I'll talk your ear off.
Yeah, I'd be happy
Godfather.
to talk about The Godfather, Godfather, Goodfellas at any length you like, and if you haven't seen it before. Maybe we can
there you go.
And watch it.
You should also plug your podcast with Jamal.
Oh yeah, I would love to do that. My podcast with Jamal, Unclear and Present Danger, we actually talk about movies, not Goodfellas and Godfather, but we talk about 90s political thrillers and what they mean about the politics of that era. We got an event coming up at the end of this week, the 12th, at the Metrograph Theater in New York, where we're talking about the movie Falling Down. I think it might be sold out, but hopefully we'll do others soon. And yeah, please listen.
Fantastic. What a movie.
Yeah.
I have one last question because I think there's one dimension that we haven't touched on quite yet that is another Trump explanation, which is the kind of talk show, talk radio dimension, because you can't really understand Trump without understanding. And this is another thing that, like, there are lots of arguments about how unique Trump is and MAGA is and so forth. But I think people that didn't live through it or haven't studied it don't realize how odious Rush Limbaugh and talk radio was. And how, besides besides the obvious racism and misogyny, but just there are a lot of precursors there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his brain is totally created by that world. I mean, listening to and watching those shows, he's created by that. That's what he sounds like. And,
that's the swamp that the swamp creature that is Trump emerged from.
Yeah, precisely. So he's just that man, and I think that, if you go back and listen to those shows or watch those shows, and then you look at Trump today, you're like, yeah, he's produced by that. And that's why people like him, because he could be on fucking, he could be a guest on it. He was a guest on many of those shows. He sounds like he runs one of them. It's a big fucking talk show. He could be just as comfortable on 60 Minutes as Jerry Springer, He's a man of the people in that way. So yeah, I think that chapter was a lot of fun and interesting to write, and just to see like, all right, this is a lot,
there's a lot of disaffected white men, with misogynistic, racist views, who I think placated or nursed their dissatisfaction, also probably economic issues, whatever, by listening to talk radio on the commute, and just that was their salve. And for that to then become a political movement, you can see how there was already this kind of, priming of that pump that it takes.
Precisely. Yeah, for sure. That's it.
Yeah. It does strike me that, if you ever watch Trump giving a speech, like, he's pretty bad at reading stuff off the teleprompter, but what he is good at is just like babbling, like just filling the air with words. And I think he's gotten
no dead air.
Yeah. And that, if there's one thing that you absolutely must have as a talk radio host, it's the ability to talk on cue for like 4 hours straight.
And if we could finish with a final thought on the debate,
sure.
Trump also all the time, including in the debate, says all kinds of nonsensical things. But unlike Biden, who, to be fair, might have even more cognitive issues, he can make nonsense sound and look okay.
Right. No, that's a very good point. I mean, Biden's never been a great orator under the best of conditions. Trump is a entertainer in the sense that he can gab at a crowd. It's almost like, an insult comic or something from the Catskills, the Borscht Belt. Like, you can just gab with the crowd and keep it going. And I think what the kind of exactly. He's just spewing the wrong kind of nonsense. You need someone who's just like more of a natural entertainer, I guess. I'm sorry to say, or just more of a natural orator who speaks in blocks of complete sentences and sound coherent, even if they're not terribly meaningful. Yeah, Biden. I don't know, man.
Thoughts on this shit show that's going on right now?
I have no idea what to do or what to say. It's very concerning. I'm sort of I don't know if I'm just high on life right now because I'm just
cognitive dissonance is appropriate. I get it.
Yeah. I'm just like, hey man, people like my book. I love all the praise I'm getting, and it's not very public spirited of me, but I'm feeling great.
That's totally fair. Totally fair.
But I don't know. I think it's also kind of this resignation where I'm just like, well, I just don't know what's going to happen, and they're going to have to figure it out. I think he should drop out probably, but there are absolute downsides to that, and difficulties that brings up too. I think it is mostly self-interested for the Democratic Camarilla. Really, it's not even the party, the little nub surrounding Biden at this point. But I do believe there are serious, I don't think that everybody who thinks that is necessarily in bad faith. I do believe there are some real problems there. I would say it's 80 to 90% bad faith, but I get that it's sort of a scary decision to make. It's a tough call. That's all I'll say. I'm not envious of, I think I'm helping make decisions in the world because I write and talk to you guys, and I'm like, they should definitely do this. But if I was a high-ranking member of the Democratic Party and they're like, John, what should we do? Right? I wouldn't get a moment's sleep.
John, if they call you up, say he should resign immediately and hand it over to President Harris. That's what you say, John.
I think I would probably say it.
Okay, because they might call you and you need to be ready.
Fear.
Say this is a tough, you have to be a bold leader, as Machiavelli would want us to be. You have to just
right. I can't talk about the Machiavellian solution to all this, which would be
Biden passed away in his sleep last night.
Exactly,
sadly.
He died, and then he was a great patriot. We all loved him, but let's move on. Yeah,
let's have a tremendous funeral for him and build up the patriotism for President Harris.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to address one more aspect of the book before we let you go,
sure.
Which is kind of like, to bring back old demons, the economic anxiety debate. And it strikes me that you have like a kind of a nuanced take on this, that it's not one or the other thing, that there are always these sort of currents, especially in a society with the history that the United States does, but that when you have, under the surface of the 90s economy, like massive deindustrialization, it's concentrated in certain regions and so on and so forth, that sort of provides a fertile breeding ground for, racism, misogyny, and just like straight up crackpot, like nonsense, right? Am I summarizing that correctly?
Yeah, I would say it's neither one or the other. They're always related to each other. I mean, like you can't completely abstract out any of these forces, right? They all exist. And I happen to think that racism, is a very deep part of American life, but politics are ultimately determined by a complicated set of factors. I think racism is a certain way in which living in the deeply competitive and precarious environment of capitalism is sort of coped with an ideology that fetishizes certain aspects of it and offers a kind of false narrative about of social advancement or social decline, what those things really mean. So that's my reading on it. And when I looked at the book, just speaking empirically, you find them always wrapped up together. I find very few points in which there are not class and race things happening at the same time. So economic anxiety and racial anxiety are sort of two manifestations of the same thing, I would say. And they appear in different ways at different times, but I don't think you can count out either. When you're doing an analysis of politics, you got to look at what's actually happening. You got to see what voters actually do. Authoritarianism, for the lack of a better word, is another factor, which sometimes comes with racism and sometimes doesn't, and sometimes comes with a fear of economic falling, and also sometimes comes with a group that's in economic domination and wants to maintain it. Those aren't mutually exclusive, middling groups that have a certain degree of domination, invested in a certain degree of domination, but don't have absolute power, may choose to go with, as we were talking about earlier, the big boss that can keep them relatively safe and sound and where they're at, rather than to risk, some kind of egalitarian program where their status is in the air.
The patriarch, because it's not just the wages of whiteness, which is that, but you talk about no fault divorce and also family breakdown, and the narrative that was spun about the family being attacked by, what today is the woke left, but at the time was, Murphy Brown or whatever. Yeah. And you have, probably again, lots of guys who are divorced or not doing well financially. And, there's this grievance politics that also feeds into this desire for a powerful patriarch that will bring back, what was once. And that's a through line that extends back from the time you're writing about to now too, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And older, but yeah, this I think was an acute moment where that comes out.
Yeah. It strikes me that it's probably not a coincidence that, after 2008, the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, 10 years later, in these very sort of complicated and interlinked ways, you see, the far right surging in many countries. In France, economy has not been great. We had a lost decade in this country. And the combination of, poor economic performance, extreme precarity, and, kind of a loss of status among, the enfranchised bourgeois, like middle class folks. That's a really toxic combination when you mix it up with, especially I think in the post 2008 crisis, where nobody was held accountable for anything in either Europe or the United States. It was basically like, we're just going to shove this all under the rug, bail everyone out, and blame it on Greece and black homeowners.
Right. Yeah.
Last question.
Sure.
Do you think so? In doing this book and in thinking about what we've just been talking about, what kind of politics is best to kind of combat? I mean, we just saw tactically the French kind of made a move that helped at least, put the far right at bay for now. But, they're not going away. And what kind of politics do we need as a response so that the right doesn't take advantage of these economic anxieties and all these kind of things that you've mined here in your book?
I think it's very difficult to say in advance. I mean, obviously the situation in France is complicated. It's very easy to say, well, let's form a popular front. That popular front has a lot of contradictions and problems. It was formed in the face of a kind of emergency created by Macron. I think we have a similar emergency in the United States, and we don't have really great leadership. I have never considered before a protest vote, but I live in a blue state. I am extremely distraught by the way the Democratic Party has handled this situation in the face of what they tell us, and I agree, is a really serious problem. So usually I would say, well, we have to rally to the lesser of two evils and, form a united front and so on and so forth. But as a person in a relatively, in an absolutely safe state, this is not such a great question to answer your question, but I am actually considering a protest vote because I want to register dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party, which I don't recommend if you live in a swing state, but perhaps if you live in New York, if you live in California, Hawaii, you may consider perhaps sending a message that you're not thrilled with the way this has been handled. I think I never really thought I would say that, but I'm at the point now seeing this unfold where that seems like a rational response to this, or not vote at all. I don't know. I again, not recommending that for a swing state person. You must go out there and do what you got to do, but I'm trying to figure out how best in the time I have between now and the election to register my deep disappointment with the Democratic Party and anger over how this is being handled. And it seems to me, I mean, I'm not thrilled with any of the third parties, obviously. They all seem pretty ridiculous to me. But I'll find some way to make a protest vote. I don't know. Figuring that out. Considering that what I'm saying right now is the politics that we should pursue are, in tactical voting, essentially. Where it's necessary, vote for the Democrat, and where you can, perhaps register a protest without endangering the Democrat winning, consider it.
Yeah. But we need the opposite of Joe Biden's 2020 nothing will fundamentally change approach to politics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how the Democrats at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no magic formulas. Joe Biden did domestically at least a lot of what I recommended, actually, specifically during the debates over the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act and so forth. Manufacturing investment is exploding, and especially in
Ryan, did you write the article "P.S. Don't do genocide"? Because if you didn't write that, I understand what happened. Now I get it.
Yeah, that doesn't really seem to have benefited him that much, and maybe that's just from his own, personal foibles and the fact that his age has just dominated all campaign coverage basically for the last 6 months. But, as you say, John, it's really not up to us. There's like 5 people who get to make this decision, whether we vote for Biden or somebody else, and that sucks. But
seems to be that it's true. I think that public opinion does matter.
Yeah.
Let's shame Jill Biden. I like that approach.
Yeah.
I think we should shame Jill Biden a lot.
Yeah,
sure
he doesn't seem to
listening.
be responding to it, but I think
Jill,
just,
the wife. The wife is in
Yeah.
charge.
Just keep on screaming. Everyone should just keep on screaming and yelling and see what happens.
Amen to that.
That's
all right. Well,
Yep.
John, the book, once again, is called When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s. I highly recommend it. Really enjoyable read. And congratulations again on all the success, John.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks so much for having me on. This was a great conversation.
And
Always
thanks,
a pleasure, John.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you in the next episode.